common dynamic that I notice with couples navigating betrayal and recovery from sex and pornography is when they get into recovery or choose to participate in a recovery journey. Typically, early on, there is a clear kind of submission by the addict to kind of please or placate his spouse or partner. And so that dynamic is really important for the addict because they ultimately don't want to lose the person that they have hurt and harmed. And so they kind of go into hyperdrive performance mode. What are all the things that I can do that could potentially save this relationship? And that's where a lot of people come into the recovery journey. They come in bred out of a crisis. It's not because they're motivated to change. That hopefully shifts, but they're motivated to keep the relationship. And so we talk a lot about early in kind of the crisis and really using the crisis as a tool to help them see how they got to this point, but also hopefully get them to a position where they're choosing recovery, not just out of the crisis, but also out of a desire to change and heal. But this kind of aspect of the weight that the addict feels of all the things that need to change, all of the decisions that need to be made, all of the harm that they've done, when they're faced with that, they can, at a certain point, almost feel like they're the identified patient and their partner is the identified victim. And they almost adopt that mentality and can feel like they have no ground to stand on. I'll hear versions of that in my office often, like, I have no ground to stand on. It's like, am I not allowed to feel? Am I not allowed to be hurt? Am I the only one that makes mistakes? They want at a point to feel as though there is more equality in the relationship. Now, I'll spare you a little bit of time in terms of how I navigate that, but this is just a normal kind of common thing that I see in the room with my clients and the groups that I run, and I think is shared amongst a lot of therapists. And the reality is no, it's like, you can be hurt. Nobody's here saying that you're the only one who is making mistakes. It's just the only reason we are here is because you've been hiding and lying for so long. And ultimately, like, you probably don't understand the extent at which that pain has impacted the lives of those that you're in a relationship with. And you really don't understand how long this is going to be following you, how long it's going to be a part of the story and the dynamic in your relationship. It is now a part of your story and your journey. Whether the relationship stays or it ends, it's always going to be a part of the narrative. I was talking with my wife this morning and I asked her permission to share a story that happened a few years ago where we were at a friend's house and they had just had their first child. And at this point we had, I think, 2 kids, and we were just talking about parenting and the challenges of it and what it's like having your first child. And the conversation kind of morphed into some of the ways in which we struggle as parents. As we were talking, I shared something specific about a way in which I noticed like I was struggling as a parent and harming my kids. And then I was talking about some of the things that I was trying to work on to change that and shift that. And in that moment, I was truly being vulnerable with this couple and my wife. And then my wife, in the middle of the conversation, looked at me and she said out loud, "You still do that." And I was so pissed at her. I was so mad. One of the reasons I was mad is I felt embarrassed and humiliated. I felt hurt by what she did. I felt entitled to her praise in that moment, to affirm me in front of other people. So there was a lot of emotions going on for me that I just chose to bury. I stuffed them. I didn't acknowledge what she said. I just moved on to the next topic of conversation, and I never revisited it with her. Until about 2 weeks later, I noticed that I had continued to think about that moment, and it was almost burning a hole inside of me. And in not dealing with my emotions and what I was feeling in that moment, resentment grew. And I was being an ass to my wife throughout those 2 weeks at really various different points in our journey and relationship. And at no point had I made a decision to come to my wife and talk to her about what had happened that night, what I was feeling, what I was frustrated with. And it reminded me of a lot of the times where my clients stuff and bury their emotions. They choose to swallow the hurt and the pain that they feel. And so after getting some perspective from people that I trust in my life, it became abundantly clear that I needed to talk with my wife about this. And so after we put our kids to bed, we sat down and I just said, "Hey, I need to share something with you that I've been holding on to for a while." I expressed how I was hurt by what she said, and mostly around the fact that she did that in front of other people. One of the agreements that my wife and I have had for a long time is that we won't tear each other down in front of others. And That's something that we are both committed to doing, and it's something that we both have failed at. And my wife listened to me intently, and then she responded and she said, "You're right, that was wrong." And at that moment, all I wanted to do was stop the conversation because I got what I wanted. I got my wife's admission of guilt. But then she continued to talk. And she said, I think one of the reasons that I do that at times is because I don't want to praise you in public because you have hurt me so publicly. And as we sat there, I was overwhelmed with a feeling of connectedness to my wife because what she said made complete and total sense. I had hurt my wife in so many public ways, humiliated her, hurt her, lied to her, and all of that was exposed publicly. So she didn't have to just deal with the pain that she felt from my actions. She had to deal with the exposure to the public. And as she said that, all I could feel and think in that moment was how I missed that in assessing my own hurt and pain. How I didn't think about what it's like for her to hear me talk positively about myself or even be vulnerable about things I struggle with, because oftentimes it can be a reminder of our past and our journey and our story and the pain that I've caused. And I share this story at times with my clients and in groups because the one thing that I felt more than anything in that moment was a deep connection with my wife. The discomfort of holding two things at once, my hurt and her hurt at the same time. In a moment where a big part of me wanted it to be all about my hurt. A big part of me wanted to win, for her to just admit she was wrong and be done with the conversation. But this conversation was colored by our story. I tainted it based on the actions that I chose a long time ago. And that is something that I am responsible for holding in the relationship and maintaining line of sight to in order to remain connected with my wife. And she gently and courageously and empathically reminded me, without absolving herself of responsibility for the choice that she made, she allowed me and afforded me an opportunity to understand her more. And I didn't have to swallow my hurt. It didn't negate the hurt and pain that I felt. It just added more color and more richness to what had happened in that moment because of our story and because of the choices that I made.